to make a representation, or at least alert them to the fact that there is currently Natural England looking at the full coast route around Lancashire, indeed around the whole of England, and that is a particular area that a number of bodies, including ourselves, have raised for consideration. Because through the planning process, of course, the planners at Preston would have the opportunity, maybe with the owners of the tracks website, they would have the opportunity of trying to get provision along the river bank. And again, of course, you know, it's close to the urban area of Preston. Preston as a city has been looking towards increasing its facility, not just for cycling and walking, you know, but for all sorts of green provision, a bit along the lines of maybe Lancaster. So I think they will be responsive if we made a representation. So I'd like to ask your permission to make, comments to Preston Council, the planning department, just to alert them to the fact about the coastal access, Natural England, and the representations that are currently made and currently being considered about that particular route. Would people be happy with that? Well, I've seen quite a few nods, so can I take that everybody's okay on that one? Yeah, okay, thank you. Unless anybody's got any comment on that, I think we can move then on to item 5. Are you okay if I move on from 4? Sorry, yeah, okay.
Yeah, could I, Rosemary?
Yeah, sure.
The section from Silverdale to Cleveley's on the coastal path. Yeah. That's been approved.
Well, I'm just moving on to that now.
Are you moving on to that? Oh, God,
yeah,
that's section 5, of course. I've got it wrong. Thanks. Yeah, sorry.
I'm just moving on to item 5 then. So we've just received notification that the section that we looked at 12 months ago, we indeed made representation 12 months ago. Is it 6 areas? I think 3 of the 6 sections have gained approval. Am I right on that, everybody? I think it's 3 out of 6.
That is correct. Yeah, chapters 2, 4 and 6.
I mean,
it's 4 and 6, yeah.
2, 4 and 6. So I was very, very pleased to see that. Now, my question on that to David Goody, which I did put to him before the meeting, but he didn't know the answer, which is maybe why he's not at the meeting. I shouldn't say that, of course. Is in the NE reports for each of the sections, there's itemised costings for the work to be done on the ground, and of course that money was ring fenced by, in fact, the previous 2 governments ago. So that money is ring fenced, and I've been asking about that for the last couple of years. So the question I want to ask is the work going to start on the ground quickly on those sections that have now got approval, because the work on the ground has been costed and the money, as far as I know, has been made available by the Treasury. So Garth, given that David's not here and he was going to be asking his colleague who's been doing the work on the coastal footpath alongside Natural England, can we try and get a speedy answer, please, on that one?
Yeah, I'll take that back to David, yeah.
Okay. Rosemary, what were we going to say about those sections?
Yeah, section 5 hasn't been approved.
No.
I was just wondering whether a lot of objection to that. The Ramblers and the open spaces, and a lot of local, I think, as well. Anyone any idea what's happening there?
David, what do you know at all? Yeah,
it's with the planning inspectorate. Yeah, the planning inspectorate tend to take a long time to come to any verdict.
Yeah, the 3 sections. In one sense, we don't have influence over those. Those things that are prompted to go to the inspectorate are those that are raised by landowners, where they've got particular objections. So it's up to the inspectorate to look at Natural England's reports, and in a sense we just have to sit on the sidelines and see what happens on that. Okay, and obviously we'd all like that to be done and dusted fairly soon, but we don't know. The track record up in Cumbria is that there's still some issues that have been looked at that have been in the pipeline for a couple of years now, aren't they, David, on that?
More than 2 years.
Yeah.
Nearly 4 years with the planning inspectorate.
Yeah, yeah. But as I say, going back to the positive, I'd like to see us starting the work on the 3 that have already got approval in Lancashire, because the money's there, as far as I know. Okay. Is there anything else on coastal access? No. Okay. Let's move on to the countryside code. Again, I asked Garth to circulate 1 or 2 weeks ago the draft new countryside code, which Natural England have put out for consultation, because they feel that it needs to be updated. 1 or 2 of the points that we're making were actually COVID specific, which I'm not sure are entirely appropriate, because obviously we hope that that's just a sort of a temporary issue. But, you know, I thought when I read it that it was quite a significant improvement on the previous countryside code, and there's a sort of a long and a shorter version. So I don't know whether people here took the opportunity to make any comments, but at least we had the opportunity. I mean, I think we're just beyond the deadline now, so we couldn't do it from now on. But what I was thinking of doing was at least asking us at the next meeting to have a quick look at it, even though, you know, it will be, as it were, set in concrete there. Anybody got any comments on that? Adam, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Sorry,
Yes,
I'm on mute. I've unmuted myself there. I don't know. I mean, it's one of the reasons I joined today. I don't know if this is the right place to raise it or it's maybe in any other business. Nationally, we're fed into the new developed countryside code. I just wanted to raise the issue of what we've seen on farms and on landowners during the COVID pandemic. What we saw, obviously, with people not going on holiday, is when the weather got nice, we saw quite a large increase in people actually going to visit farms and getting out of the country, which was good. But farmers have experienced quite a lot of problems, particularly around things like littering, around dog muck. The lack of provision of toilets has been quite an issue. So if you're a farmer, you go into a field and you find somebody's left you a nice little message in there, that sort of thing. Had problems with things like parking, so people parking in gates, people parking on roads and blocking it for tractors. Issues over dog attacks, and probably the worst ones we've seen are issues on things like trespass, wild camping. So people, what they do is they go and camp in your field and just leave the £10 tents, and then we have seen issues with respect to you know, people attacking, confrontation between farmers and landowners. I don't particularly think it was anybody who like represents the group of people who are on this call. It tended to be maybe a new group of users. Lancashire didn't seem to be hit quite as badly as places like Cumbria and Snowdonia and things like that. But really my request, my comment would be is there any way maybe the NFU and yourselves and Lancashire County Council can maybe jointly get some messages out there before things like Easter, before half term, to say if you are going to visit the countryside, this is what you need to do. This is what sort of like things you need to abide by. Keep your dog on the lay down livestock, take your litter away with you, etc., etc. So that's just a request as much as anything, because you know there were some extreme examples. And I'm sure there was extreme examples on both sides as well, but I do think, you know, some positive messages from this forum and also from Lancashire County Council ourselves might be a way forward. So that was just a comment and a request, really.
I'm 100% with you there, Adam. I think some of the examples of littering and abuse of the countryside were just awful, really. And certainly in the Lake District, there were some really extreme examples. But even in Lancashire, you know, I've noticed in certain locations, the amount of littering has just been absolutely deplorable. And, you know, we as a, you know, I'm in the mountaineering club, you can see my badge there, but we did a litter pick walking down the River Yarrow from its source on the top of Winter Hill. Well, we didn't quite get as far as close to where I live, but we nearly got that way. And what we noticed there when we were doing the litter pick was that when we were on the footpaths that were quite a long way away from the roads, in other words, where you had to be, as it were, if you don't mind me using the sense, a proper walker to get there, there was no littering. But once you got very close to the roads, within, you know, a few yards, a few tens of meters of roads, that was where the littering was absolutely awful. And it was very, very clear there were a lot of people going to takeaways and things like that, parking up, chucking stuff out of the car doors, in some occasions maybe walking, you know, and maybe climbing over a wall that there shouldn't have been or whatever. And there was absolutely tons of stuff within a relatively short distance of places that people could go to in the rural areas. And I think it's absolutely deplorable, really. And I'm with you 100% on that. I think we ought to take every opportunity, either as a laugh. I mean, we don't have any publicity outlet, if you see what I mean. We don't have that particular infrastructure, but certainly I'd hope that all of the three highway authorities, because we're not just Lancashire, of course, we're Lancashire, we're Blackburn, we're Blackpool, would all, when and wherever possible, put information out, good quality information out to the public, and implore them to follow the countryside code and to respect the countryside, to enjoy it, but to respect it. You're absolutely right on that. And I thought it was very sad, really, some of the things that I've experienced in one or two places, not just in Lancashire, but, you know, on the previous lockdown or just after the lockdown, you know, when you could get out and about to more distant places. Certainly, you know, we've got a place that we go to in Wales as well, near Snowdonia. I mean, just unbelievable, really. And, you know, I think one of the interesting issues is that I think that there's sources of information which are out there which prompts people to go to certain localities. So, for example, coming back to Lancashire, there's a place called Fairy Glen, which is just over the other side of Parbold Hill, going over towards Ormskirk. And it's a walk which is, you know, quite pleasant, really. But the police have been there over the last 2 or 3 weeks because it's been absolutely chock-a-block with people, you know, and it's been swamped, really. There's been just too many people there, really. And I just find it interesting, really, because there are a lot of places that you can go for a walk when you're locked down, even, you know, within the rurals, which is, you don't have to go so far away from your home. But it seems to be that people have to read up somewhere, and I'm sure a lot of it comes from the internet. And, you know, there must be some sorts of places where people are saying, oh, that's a really good place to go. You must go, you must go, you must go. It's interesting, really.
Going on that,
Michael,
Richard.
yeah. Sorry, say that again, Michael.
Going on that thing, Richard, before my accident at Christmas, I was doing trig points, going around to trig points in Lancashire. And I noticed quite a few of the trig points, they seemed to mecca, because there was a trig point next to a car park, a mecca of people just travelling there, just turn up to in the cars, you go, what? And then some of them might go for a bit of walk, but a lot of them just hung around the cars and litter all over the place. But the litter problems have been a pain for years now. I remember when I cycled in Northern Ireland over 10 years ago, all alongside the road was litter all over the place. It's just a public education for everybody.
Yeah. Okay, so can we agree that we would, as I say, I think we need to be asking the county council and its the publicity machine that it has to put out the information from time to time, trying to encourage people to respect the countryside and enjoy it, but to take account of the points that Adam was making. And certainly I think the countryside code, the new countryside code, I think is very, very good in terms of, trying to educate people to be sensible, really. And it's all the points that you made, Adam. Are we okay on that?
Richard, it's Alison from
Hello,
Wire.
Alison, yeah.
Hiya, just to make the point that just to make the point that all the local authorities have been working with the Let's Do It for Lancashire campaign. Yeah. So you would have seen banners going up on various sites with the Let's Do It logo. So potentially what would be useful to do would be to ask if we could use that Let's Do It campaign, but do a rural, sort of like a countryside focus. So rather than it being on parks and open spaces, we're being around reminding people how to explore the countryside safely and considerately. And then it's part of the COVID sort of response, but we could be shared across the districts as well as within the counties as well. Just a suggestion anyway, Richard.
I think that's a good idea. Yeah. Okay. I mean, in a sense, we just have to ask these points are taken forward really by county councillors and or by officers who are either here or not here. Shall we move on? Ian, do you want to make a comment? Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, just to let you know, Chairman, I am making notes about these issues, and
yeah,
I'll speak to some of the people. But also, you talk about getting the message out. We are live streamed at the minute.
Yes.
So
yes.
I don't know whether there's 100 people watching or
no
100,000, but whoever is listening has obviously hopefully got the message. So
that's right. Yes,
it's one way of getting the message.
But there are lots of other ways we can get the information out, aren't there, Ian? Besides just the live streaming of this particular meeting.
We have a publicity department at LCC. So I say I've made a few notes, and I'll just send a few emails later.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Okay, we move on to 7 then. What prompted me to put this on the agenda initially was I was interested to know whether we have any hard data on the rights of way in Lancashire, because at one time, for example, the rights of way people used to do a 10% survey across all of the parishes in Lancashire. So obviously over a 10-year period, it went all around all the areas that were parished. And it was very, very detailed survey done by a combination of rights of way officers working with the local parishes. And that gave some very, very detailed information, which enabled the county council, to put resources in where that was needed in terms of improving footpaths or just maintenance. We talked about bridges earlier. So I'd be interested in if that was happening, and I think it isn't. I think that's stopped now. The other sort of work that used to go on in terms of condition survey of footpaths was one that was undertaken by the Ramblers Association. So do you want to just make a brief comment about that, David? Because that was a national scheme, wasn't it, that ran?
It was a national scene. Going back to around the 90s and around 2000, when things was done by pencil and paper or pen and paper, we used to do usually about every 2 years. In 2016, we tried to do a survey using computers. The computer program didn't work, and the thing just got a bad name. It's probably time we tried to do something similar again. Hopefully the computer program will work this time.
Yeah, okay. Neil, yeah.
The ease of use surveys that the Lake District National Park do, which the Ramblers Association do take part in, that still goes, and they do that every 6 months. And the idea is that they get round all of the paths over a 20-year period. And I know the counties used to do this, Lancashire used to do this, but there's no legal obligation for them to have to do it these days. So they have done it for quite a number of years.
No. But you see, I did. Sorry, Neil. Yeah, I did ask David before the meeting about this issue, and I was saying, have you got hard data on which to do any forward planning in terms of rights of way, or is it, is essentially the work just reactive? And essentially, it is just reactive now. So in other words, it's just basically reacting to complaints on, styles that are broken or, issues to do with diversions and things like that. And it's just responding to those sorts of issues rather than having a forward plan to say, well, this is where we're at. These are the good bits. These are the not so good bits. And this is what we can do to work on the areas that need some improvement. And I just think it's sad that we've lost that. But if I can move on, the thing, and we've had 2 or 3 presentations about this, the Natural England.
Sorry, Richard.
Yeah.
I think Paul Withington's got a question.
Right, sorry. Okay, I can't see your face there. I just see a little hand. Go on, Paul. Yeah, Blackburn.
Hello, Paul Withington, Blackburn Council. Just wanted to add to your point that we do get regular updates from Ramblers, both on past paths and failed paths, in their opinion. And pre-COVID, we have been continuing to do what was the old BVPI, so a random 10% survey of the network, and whether they are fit and available for use. The only issue we had was that because it is a random 10%, over the 10 years, you're not guaranteed to still get the full coverage.
Yeah. But you've still been continuing that then, Paul, in Blackburn. Would you be continuing that once?
Before COVID?
Yeah, I know that. Are you likely to be continuing that once on the assumption that COVID, stops being the issue that it is now, really, when we get back to normality?
Yeah,
okay.
We would still be doing it during COVID.
Yeah.
The only issue we've had is our officer is classed as extremely vulnerable. So she's not been able to do the visits during COVID. Okay,
yeah. So that's an interesting contrast then between the two authorities, isn't it, really? And we don't know about Blackpool because Blackpool don't tend to come to the Access Forum meetings, unfortunately. But that's interesting that there is that contrast. Thank you for telling us about that, Paul. Can I just move on then to the sort of third development then? We've had representations over the last 10 years or so, a couple of times, about a survey that Natural England have done across the country. Now, this has been a very, very, very detailed survey, and it's one that's involved them doing in-house interviews with people across a random selection and a properly statistically worked out random selection to look at all the sorts of issues to do with not just rights of way, but access to the countryside and so on and so forth. Now, what's interesting is that they have moved to terminate that initial survey. It was called the capital MENE surveys, and that was done between 2009 and 2019. But they have continued with that since then in what they're now calling a people and nature survey. So what I'd like to do is ask Craig, and Garth sent you out the web links for this, but you might have not have had a chance to look at them. I'd like to ask Craig if he'll just turn the pages on these reports for us, because I think they're worth having a look at, even if we can't digest them properly this morning, because they are things that I'd like to, we ought to draw to people's attention. So this is the first one then. People and Nature Survey for England, monthly interim indicators, experimental statistics. And if you look at that, that was published just a couple of weeks ago on the 13th of January. So it's extremely up to date, extremely contemporary. So do you just want to sort of roll through the pages, Craig, for us? I mean, so some of these first paragraphs just tell us what they've done. But if we look at this first chart, for example, it talks about some of the increases in access to the outdoors by people, and particularly through COVID, there has been a noticeable and measurable increase in the number of people visiting the countryside. And a part of that has led into some of the problems that we just talked about a moment or two ago. But there is the hard evidence that there are more people accessing the countryside than have done in previous years. Okay, we move on then a little bit. Yeah. I mean, some of the other points, I'm not sure you can see these clearly. There's one or two. That's an interesting point there, because that's some people have stopped going into the countryside because they're frightened of getting COVID. You see, the overall numbers are up, but some people are declining to go. Now, what's interesting here is that when we look at more detail, there are different groups that have been differentially accessing or not the countryside. So I don't know whether that sort of crops up in the next few pages. If we can just have a look. Okay. Yeah, so we're moving off that now. Okay, so okay. Does anybody want to make any comment about that one before we look at the next two? You see, one of the things about the survey, and I don't know whether the officers have looked at this, but over that 10-year period, and then complementary result after the original MENE survey, was that the actual data was able to be extracted from Natural England at county level. So I don't know whether any of the officers in the County Council have looked in detail at this sort of data, but there are spreadsheets with the data, so you can actually look and see whether there is anything particular about what's been happening in Lancashire. So I was talking about some of the hard data that we don't have in terms of our own surveys and the surveys done by the Ramblers Association, but there is still hard data that comes from NE at Lancashire level. But I don't know whether officers have been extracting that and building that into their planning. Shall we move on to the next one then and have a look at that? Because I think this is a very, very interesting one. So this particular report, if you've had a chance to look at it, particularly looks at young people. So we've been learning over the last, few months about how young people have been impacted by not being able to go to school. This is an interesting report which talks about whether young people have or haven't been able to get outside or not. And I think this should be read very, very carefully. Because from what I remember of reading it, the messages are that young people have had more limited access to the outdoors, and that has been particularly the case depending on people's social background. So, it's like a lot of issues. If you're at the poorer end of the spectrum, you've been less likely to get outdoors. If you're towards the middle classes and the upper middle classes, you're more likely to get into the outdoors. And there's also a difference depending on people's ethnic background. So people from different ethnic minority backgrounds have been less likely to get outdoors than was the case, whereas other people have been getting out more. So there's some interesting points here. And remember, this is now about young people. So why go outside? What are the sorts of reasons for you going outside? And as I said, this is questions to young people, asking them and getting some feedback from them. So if you just have a look at the start of that point 6 there, 6 in 10 people, 60% reported to have spent less time outdoors since the start of the coronavirus, more than double the proportion that spent more time outside. So that worries me really, that alongside all of these issues about whether children at schools or not at schools rather are getting a good education because they're now at home and they're having to sit in front of the screen and do things, actually they're not getting out either. They're being more closeted inside. And bear in mind, this was work that was done when we had the very fine weather through the first lockdown in March, April, towards May time. So I think you can imagine what the answer will be for the current lockdown in terms of young people getting outdoors. And I know that in some schools, I'm involved with a couple of schools in Lancashire. Quite a number of schools are introducing a thing called Forest School into their curriculum. I don't know whether people know anything about it, but Forest School is where young people deliberately go out of the classroom into an area outside of the class. I'm talking about primary school children, for perhaps half a day a week, and do a lot of education based on all the sorts of experiences that you get outside, whether it's looking at trees or plants or animals, whether it's making little shelters. And I'm talking about going out in bad weather or good weather. And there's a lot of feedback coming back from schools that are doing Forest School that are saying that this is very, very positive and have got a lot of great benefits to young people. And it's certainly something that is increasing in popularity around schools. Well, of course, if children aren't in school, then they can't be taken outdoor by their teachers. And the evidence is that the parents aren't replicating that to any great extent. Have people had a chance to look at that report before this morning? Or I know we've only had a chance to turn the pages now. Does anybody want to make any comments about this?
Richard, it's Alison again. Just to
Hello,
say,
Alison, yeah.
I have had a brief look at it. I have to admit, I'd like to have a further look. I do think it's very, very informative, and it is important that we continue, that we encourage Natural England to continue to do this sort of work for us, because we need this. We need this data to be informed about why people are doing what they're doing.
That's right.
And it's so important for public health and well-being, as well as the way we manage our sites.
That's right, yeah. What I'd like to propose on this one is that whilst most of the time the Access Forum influences or seeks to influence the highway authorities, on this one, I'd like to refer this report to the education directorates of the three authorities and just draw their attention to this report, because obviously the education sections in each of the authorities are currently engaged with all of the out-of-school learning, and I'd like them to at least be aware of the fact that people have done some significant research to show that, you know, not only maybe that there are changes in, you know, the way that children are learning English and, you know, maths and things like that, but also it is having an impact on young people and them, in this case, not getting to the outdoors as much as they had done in the past. Chris, would you like to come in on that? Can you switch your phone on, please, your microphone on?
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to have a look at the figures in detail, but it did seem to me that there were obvious cross-references which would be of interest about the actual use of, say, roads and families walking on roads in country areas, and, you know, with busy traffic, increasing loads of traffic, and also walking across fields where there may be cattle and this sort of thing. You know, to what extent are children actually being, and families being, perhaps deterred from going out simply for safety concerns, particularly the road use? And we've seen that very obviously locally. And it's just a sort of interactive question, really. You know, does one map onto the other? And if so, could anything be done? Should anything be done about making it safer for children to go out and families to go out?
Good question. Anybody else want to comment? I can't see everybody, by the way, with hands up, so you'll have to shout. Who else has got a hand up? Who else is going to comment? Anybody? No? I mean, there are plenty of places where you don't have to walk on roads. I know that a lot of the footpaths at the moment are very, very muddy, but there are plenty of places which are, you know, perfectly accessible to people. I mean, near where I live, we've got a country park, Yarra Valley Country Park, beautiful place. You know, through the seasons, the bird life is fantastic to watch, and so on and so forth. And that's, you know, within a few minutes of my village. And I know that, you know, many of the areas in Lancashire, there are plenty of places which are pretty able to be accessed by people. Canals, you know, canal towpaths, for example, so forth. Anybody want to make any comment?
Can I just come back on that comment you've just made, Richard? And that is, there seems to be a difference between the rural and the urban areas, because the rural areas don't have parks. And actually, there are far fewer accessible footpaths. You know, you can't just go wandering in a field. You have to keep to the footpaths, and there are not that many of them in certain areas. So it's just to flag that up. There is a difference. And maybe that,
Yeah, I mean, I accept that, you know, the geography is different and the facilities that are available are different from place to place, obviously, you know. Yeah, but you see, there was a time when we used to have a countryside service as a county council, which we don't have now. And, you know, there was something like 30 officers in the countryside service who worked to promote and provide information and help and all sorts of things along the sort of agenda that we're talking here. Now, you know, that's a public service that has disappeared in Lancashire and indeed around the country. So, you know, we're in a rather different position. We're less able to have people on the ground, you know, to help out with those issues or to provide information or to make improvements as and where they might be needed. Anybody else want to comment in the children aspect?
Yes, I do.
Yep. Okay.
Right. Hello, Richard. Thank you. You'll find a lot. Well, speaking to a couple of friends who've got young children, they say that the same, similar to they don't go into the countryside, don't wander, they don't play as you used to do when you were a child. All they do is play with the Xboxes, and they also communicate with their friends on the Xbox or similar type of games, and they don't. That's a form of entertainment, stroke exercise. So that's reason probably why you don't see children around anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure it is a contributory factor. I'm sure that's the case. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But you see, yeah. Anyway, go on.
No,
does anybody else want to comment?
I'm just saying that you're a lot of children. I'm just saying a lot of children are engaged in playing games, and they don't speak to the other person by normal communication means. They can communicate using the messenger on the game,
or even using Zoom.
Maybe.
Yeah, a lot of children using Zoom now. Yeah, Neil, I think you had your hand up a moment ago. Neil, could you put your microphone on, Neil? Can you switch your microphone on? Or can somebody switch your microphone?
Okay, yes, it's off now. No, I didn't have my hand up, sorry.
Oh, I thought you did. Yeah.
No, I think one. Well, we'll make a comment though while I'm on. In the countryside, I think a lot of people probably don't know where the paths are unless they have an OS map. And okay, you can sometimes follow a signpost, but I think as children especially probably discouraged from just wandering willy-nilly as I did when I was a child. And if their parents aren't sort of into this type of thing and have maps and have taken their children out, you know, they're just not used to, you know, walking on paths in the countryside.
Yeah, I mean, I think you might be right there in terms of not everybody's got maps, but I mentioned it earlier about that Fairy Glen thing where it's been absolutely inundated with people. There is a lot of information now there on social media and on websites and on apps and things like that. I mean, you can now ring up hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of walks in Lancashire. You don't have to go and buy guidebooks or maps or things like that. And I mean, some of them are, you know, you can do virtual walks. I was looking at a virtual walk up Great Hill yesterday on YouTube, you know, and there's hundreds and hundreds of these things. So, you know, the world is changing very, very quickly in terms of information that's available for people. And people are using that. And, you know, not everybody's using it in the right sort of way, of course. Are there any other points that anybody wants to make on the children's aspect? I mean, are you happy to go along with my recommendation that we draw the attention of this report to the education directorates in the three authorities, you know, to look alongside the issues that are arising from COVID? Are you happy with that?
Yeah,
I mean, I can't
sounds good.
see everybody.
Yeah.
I'm going to sort of assume that the answer is yes, because I can't actually see sort of everybody. I'm not asking for votes. Okay, well, can we go on to the third report then, please, Craig, and just turn the pages on that. Okay. So just if you look at the start of this then, just before you move the pages. So this is the result of the final one of those 10-year reports, MENE reports, which brings us up to, you know, it's a little bit dated, but it's not that dated. It was September 2019. So this is looking over a period before COVID. And if you just turn the pages, please, Craig, then we'll get a bit of a flavour of it. Okay. So some of it is just telling us about how they did the report. And as I said, it was a very detailed report because it was done actually by face-to-face interviews with sort of 1,500 people, different people each year. Very, very detailed. So if we maybe look at the headline results then. It's worth people just reading those. And there's some facts and figures there which just show how you know, how much people do value the countryside, and just what sort of proportion of people do access the countryside. It gives you some of the sorts of reasons. It's very, very detailed. And if you look at some of the graphs there, then you can see that over a 10-year period, there's been quite a noticeable upward trend in terms of visits. You look at that top graph there, 2.9, 2.5, 2.7, rising up to 4 in terms of over that 10-year period, the estimated annual visits. So it's real hard data, this. And again, it goes back to the points I was making, that at one time we had a countryside service in Lancashire and indeed in other authorities to look at these sorts of issues. We don't have that now. And of course, that can be a sort of reason, Adam, why we're starting to get some of the, disadvantageous impacts in the countryside, because there just aren't as many people, helping to support people with information, advice, etc., etc., etc. So it comes down to landowners and the police, which isn't really, I don't think that's quite the best way of approaching things, really. As I say, I mean, there's too much for us to digest this morning just flicking through the pages. But if you haven't looked at it, I'm just recommending people, put a moment or two on one side, maybe after the meeting, to have a look through this, because I think it really is very potent information, really. And as I say, this particular report that we're looking at, it is possible to extract the data for Lancashire, and it needs somebody with Excel spreadsheet and the ability to draw a few graphs. But it can be done. But we can look at whether the data in Lancashire mirrors this national data or not. And I do know, because I've done it I've not done it recently within the last year or two, but I do know that, for example, it does stick out like a sore thumb, the sort of difference in terms of ethnic minority usage and access to the countryside in Lancashire in comparison with, the sort of people that are sat around the Zoom cameras here this morning. Some of the issues there again, Adam, that you were talking to earlier. Biodiversity here. Action to protect the environment. So okay, so I think that's the end of that report. As I say, in a sense, we haven't got time to read it in detail together, because it's one of those things to you know, do as a bit of homework really. But we could always return to those at you know, a future meeting in a few months' time if people wanted to. Anybody want to make a comment before we move on?
Am I permitted to add to this?
Who's that, please? I can't.
Roger Wright.
Roger, yeah, okay.
Yeah. When I was working with Highways Agency over 20 years ago, we were aware of, nationally, of a lot of movement, particularly by school children, along busy roads where there were no footways, particularly when they're dropped off by school buses to get home, and also local recreation. And one thing that comes out, if you look around, there are a lot of valuable local roads, minor roads, rural roads, which are not where you don't know where it goes, but it's a very valuable route for pedestrians, cyclists, and horse riders. What were created or initiated many decades ago by Countryside Commission are quiet lanes. I don't know how many quiet lanes we have in Lancashire, but I know it's very few. There's one at Downham.
Well, there was a quiet lanes initiative, you know, 10 or 15 years ago, and the Lancashire was a pilot authority for quiet lanes, and it got to a point where they'd done some work, and then it was never written up. And I know I can remember asking the questions about it, because they actually, you know, some money was put into it, some work was done on the ground, but there was the actual evaluation of how effective that had been was never completed. But you're quite right that there are locations. I've got some. There's a couple of quiet lanes running out of my village where there's far more people walking, particularly walking with the dogs, sometimes with children, than there are people driving down. There are two or three roads near me, and they're very, very extensively used by pedestrians as a way of, you know, getting their 3/4 of an hour or an hour's breath of fresh air without going on muddy footpaths and things like that. And that's true around the county. Now, that Quiet Roads initiative really ran into the, you know, if you excuse the pun, it ran into the ground. It didn't get anywhere. It was never pursued. But it was something that was set up by national government with pilot authorities doing work. And, you know, for example, they put gateway treatment onto these sections. So they'd make it look like, you know, it was a place where you had to drive slowly. So there were a lot of efforts to try to reduce the speeds of vehicles on some of these sections, because they were being used by pedestrians, and they were often on areas where there weren't footways, you know. And it mirrors the sorts of things that Chris was talking about, and horse riders as well, because horse riders similarly impacted by, you know, people speeding around little rural roads, whereas they can be absolutely ideal for equestrian usage. Do you remember that initiative, Chris, for maybe 15 or 20 years ago? Just switch your microphone.
Yeah, I do. The one I can remember most was the one around Chipping.
Yeah.
I can't remember all the farms, but it was quite extensively used by horse riders, because the busier roads around Chipping were very busy.
But I think you get it. You know, it's one of those things that at some point in time, you know, I'd hope that people will be able to return to, really, to look at very particular locations where, you know, because of where the rural road is, it is or can be used very extensively by walkers, by cyclists, by horse riders, as well as by cars, but with mitigation of speeds, so that we, you know, can get an appropriate mix of people without the dangers of, you know, people shooting along roads in cars at 60 miles an hour, which they can be entitled to, of course. The speed limits on some of the rural roads can be 60 miles an hour on quite small roads.
It generally is 60. Well, if I can just add that the government did publish advice in the design manual for roads and bridges of provision for non-motorised users with about 9 alternatives, many of them using existing routes. But what we felt was very, very important was waymarking and telling people where routes went and what the conditions were.
That's right.
To get, you know, if you know what the conditions are, if you know there's steep slopes or drops, you might choose not to use it. But waymarking and direct, and there's little plate, not just saying public right of way, but saying where it goes to.
Yeah.
And as I say, combine this with minor roads and private roads, which could be where a permissive right could be negotiated, could give an extremely valuable addition to our rights of way network. So
that's right.
The advice is there in design manual.
Well, some of these things we do have an aspiration in our rights of way improvement plan. I mean, we do still have a ROWIP, a rights of way improvement plan, and of course, you know, we heard earlier in the meeting that there is a local LTP4 local transport plan, you know, which can pick up these sorts of issues and you know, convert discussions that we're having into real aspirations and then ultimately planning and things actually happening on the ground. You know, so I hope that our debates can at least help a little bit into feeding into these sorts of things. Okay.
Can I just ask the
Quiet Lanes Initiative, I think, was unfortunate. It wasn't done properly. In other words, they didn't spend enough money on trying to calm the traffic, etc.
Yeah.
So therefore, the effect on the traffic was, dare I say, very minimal. So if we're going to do it, you've got to be a lot more money.
Yeah.
And I think more effective might be put a path in alongside the road concerned, rather than trying to.
I mean, that's not always possible, is it, David? If you've got a little narrow road with walls on both sides, unless you actually get some additional land from the landowners, you can't always do that, can you?
No.
But, you know, the concept was to essentially slow down traffic so that you could get, you know, a mix of users without, you know, without endangering people. It was a bit like the shared use issues in towns, which, you know, has been very successful in many places, certainly on the continent. Been very, very useful in urban areas getting shared use.
Yeah. Going to Lancashire last year, we got a track, a new one, going parallel to the road between Downham and Chatburn. And that's maybe the way we ought to be going.
Where's that, David?
Downham and Chatburn.
Downham and Chatburn, yeah.
Yeah. Putting in new tracks so people get off the road.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that was one of our recommendations in the design manual.
Yeah.
Because, of course, the whole premise was that if you had a verge, you could construct a footway on it, no problem. Yes. So it was looking at new routes, and one of them is negotiating with the adjoining owner. It might be to take a license, an easement of a strip just behind the wall.
Yes. Well, I mean, that has happened in one or two places. I can think of places where that has already happened, but it is something that we've been, you know, for a couple of decades, to my knowledge, we've been promoting and trying to recommend as and when that's a possibility, you know. Adam, did you have your hand up a moment ago? Sorry. Yeah. Anybody else want to comment?
Sorry, Richard, I think Chris.
Yeah, I just wondered whether there was any means by which the Countryside Agency report, which you said was never written up, the evaluation side of it, actually could be.
It was a county council report that was never written up.
Yeah, sorry, but financed by the Countryside Agency, presumably. But anyway, is there any way in which perhaps that could be looked at again with a view to pulling out anything useful that still stands. It's not that long ago, and things don't change that fast.
No, it is quite a long time ago, actually. I think I suspect that the officers who were involved with that in the Highways Directorate have probably retired now, I suspect.
The data should still be there.
We can ask Garth to ask, but I suspect that I did ask her several times. I suspect that the data is just sat there as data, and nobody got round to writing up the essay, doing the homework. And I doubt we'll be able to resurrect that, to be perfectly honest. We can always try and ask.
Can ask, yeah.
But can we note that, Garth, and ask around, please?
Will do.
Yeah. I'm feeling that we're coming towards the end of this item now. Unless anybody wants to make another comment. Sorry. Does anybody else want to comment? No.
I suspect the data on that Quiet Lanes report was hidden away because I suspect it was poor value for money.
Yes.
They didn't publish it.
Yes, I think you might be right. Yeah. Well, again, I think we ought to draw this particular report also formally to the attention of the three highway authorities, because I think there's a lot of substance there that can feed into, either their rights of way improvement plan or their local transport plans or whatever. So can we formally, agree to draw this particular report to the attention of the three highway authorities? Are you happy with that? Okay, I'm sort of looking at nods and things. Thank you very much. So I think we're on to item 8, which is any other business now. Is there anything, please? No? Okay. Well, I'm on to item 9 then. And I think rather than date of the next meeting, I think I'd like to take dates in the plural. So I'd like to look for a date in July and then a date in 12 months' time, dare I say 2022. So can we have a look for a date in July? Would anybody like to, be a starter for 10 on that? As far as I'm concerned, I don't think I've got anything in my area in July because I just don't know what on earth COVID's doing. Do you want to point at a date, Garth, seen as...
Well, Tuesday mornings seem to be the best. So one of the 4 Tuesdays in July.
All right, okay.
Make it
Anybody like to pick one out?
Sorry, what was that?
Suggest the 20th.
Tuesday, the 20th of July.
Yeah. Are people happy with that? Yeah. Yeah. Can we accept that? And somebody with a handy diary, would somebody like to pick out a date in 12 months' time in January? Another Tuesday. I mean, so I don't want it to conflict with any council meetings or anything like that. For example,
18th.
18th, okay.
January.
Does that meet everybody's approval?
No.
Will you be all over your Christmas parties and New Year parties by the 18th? Okay. Well, I think that's it now. So can I just thank everybody for joining us this morning. I think we've roamed over some quite interesting issues. We've got some responses to make to people, and I think I'll bid you all a fond farewell and hope you enjoy getting your exercise close to home. Okay.